You think you've seen it all, but wait until you see what happens when you mess with the wrong guy. And I'm not talking about the guy you're thinking of. I'm talking about Jason Miller, your average guy next door, the kind who spends his days working in an office and his evenings reading a good book. But here's the kicker. Jason isn't just any guy. He's a judge, and he's about to teach the neighborhood's HOA president, Linda Harper, a lesson she'll never forget. It all started with one simple mistake. The day Linda Harper decided to rip off Jason's ugly stickers from his car, little did she know, those stickers weren't just there for decoration. They were ordered by a judge. Jason wasn't your average homeowner who would back down when his rights were trampled. No, he'd been quietly biding his time, waiting for the perfect moment to let his hidden authority shine. And this was that moment. The day Linda Harper, self-appointed queen of the HOA, thought she could waltz onto Jason's property and take matters into her own hands. She didn't know the full story behind those stickers. She didn't know that the car she was so quick to criticize was protected by legal authority. That's the thing about power. It doesn't always need to shout. It just needs to sign the paper. The problem started innocently enough. Jason, a proud father and respected judge in the community, had parked his car in front of his house like he always did. But Linda, with her perfect hair and even more perfect sense of entitlement, saw the car and decided it didn't belong. The stickers, the so-called ugly stickers, were a violation of the HOA's community standards, or so she claimed. To her, they were eyesores, a blemish on the pristine image she so desperately tried to maintain for Willowbrook Estates. So, she did what any self-righteous HOA president would do. She ripped them off. But what she didn't know was that those ugly stickers were more than just a quirky fashion choice. They were part of a legal agreement, a court order handed down by Jason himself, protecting his personal property. Jason had been dealing with a long-standing legal battle with the HOA, one that had begun before he even moved into Willowbrook Estates. He had inherited the house from his late father, a place full of memories and a piece of family history that meant everything to him. The stickers, far from being a random act of rebellion, were a symbol of his victory in court, something Linda Harper clearly overlooked when she decided to take matters into her own hands. As Jason walked outside that afternoon, ready to enjoy his day off, he saw Linda standing there, looking satisfied with herself, holding the stickers in her hands like trophies. She had no idea that the woman who had always acted like the queen of the neighborhood had just crossed a line she couldn't come back from. What she didn't realize was that Jason's patience had limits, and those limits were about to be tested. Jason stood there for a moment, watching Linda with a quiet intensity. She looked up, caught his eye, and that's when she saw the change in him. The calm, the patience, it was all still there, but there was something more. Something she couldn't put her finger on. What Linda didn't know was that Jason had been preparing for this very moment. As a judge, he knew how to handle these kinds of situations. He understood the power of the law, and more importantly, he understood how to wield it when necessary. Linda, on the other hand, was a self-proclaimed enforcer of the HOA rules, a woman who thought she could dictate the lives of everyone around her. She had no idea that the very laws she thought she was enforcing were about to turn against her. Jason didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need to get angry. Instead, he did something much more satisfying. He let the law do the talking. Linda's grip on the stickers loosened, and her confident smile faded as Jason walked toward her, his steps slow but deliberate. "You know," Jason said, his voice calm, "those stickers weren't just there for decoration. They were ordered by a judge. A judge who, ironically, happens to be me." Linda's face went pale as the realization hit her. The law was on his side. And in that moment, Jason knew this was only the beginning. He wasn't just going to get his stickers back. He was going to make sure Linda understood exactly what happens when you mess with the wrong guy. Jason could feel the weight of Linda's shocked expression, but he wasn't done yet. It was like watching someone slowly realize they'd walked into a hornet's nest, and they were too far in to back out now. The air around them had shifted, and Jason wasn't about to let her off the hook. Linda's grip on the stickers faltered, and Jason could see the confusion on her face as she processed his words. He watched her blink a few times, probably trying to figure out if she had heard him right. But he wasn't here to hold her hand. "That's right," Jason continued, his voice low and steady. "Those stickers weren't some arbitrary decoration. They were ordered as part of a court ruling, one that I personally oversaw." Linda took a step back, eyes widening. She hadn't expected this. Who would? After all, who would expect the mild-mannered guy next door to have such power? Who would guess that Jason Miller, a man who spent his days quietly working in an office and his evenings sipping coffee on the porch, would be the very judge who could destroy everything she thought she had control over? For a moment, there was silence. The kind of silence that settles over everything when reality hits hard. The kind where you feel like you're in a dream, unable to move. Linda finally recovered enough to let out a nervous laugh. "Well, I'm sorry, I didn't know you were the one who ordered those." She was trying to save face, to make it seem like she hadn't just overstepped her bounds in the worst way possible. But Jason wasn't fooled. He could see the tension in her shoulders, the nervous fidgeting as she shifted from one foot to the other. The truth was, Linda didn't like being challenged. She didn't like having her authority questioned. And yet here she was, standing in front of someone who had more power than she ever would, and she didn't even know it. "You don't seem so sorry," Jason replied, his voice calm but firm. "I think you're more worried about the consequences of your actions." Linda's eyes darted around, like she was looking for an escape. But there was no way out. She had crossed a line. Jason could feel it. He knew the laws. And he knew exactly what Linda had just done. She had violated not only his property, but also the rules of the very HOA she thought she could control with an iron fist. And she wasn't about to get away with it. Linda tried to stand tall, her hands trembling slightly. "You don't scare me," she said, her voice unsteady. But Jason could see the cracks in her bravado. She was starting to understand that she was in deeper than she realized. Jason wasn't some naive homeowner who didn't know how to stand up for himself. He was a judge, a man who had spent years dealing with the legal system, and he knew exactly how to turn things around. Jason stepped forward slowly, his gaze never leaving hers. "No," he said, "I don't scare you. But the law might." Jason's voice dropped even further, almost to a whisper, and it was that quiet power that made Linda's knees tremble. "You see, Linda, the law isn't something you can bend to your will. It doesn't work like that. And you just crossed the line by ripping those stickers off my car." Linda opened her mouth, but no words came out. She was trapped in the reality of the situation. She had assumed that as HOA president, she could do whatever she wanted. She thought that because she controlled the neighborhood, she controlled everything within it. But now she was staring down the very thing that would ruin her, her own ignorance. Jason reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He didn't need to say anything. With a few swift taps, he pulled up the court ruling, the one that explicitly ordered the placement of the stickers. He turned the screen toward Linda, showing her the undeniable proof. "This court ruling," Jason said, "gives me the legal right to have those stickers on my car. And you, by taking them off, have just violated that right. You're lucky I'm not pressing charges right now." Linda stared at the screen, her face pale as she read the legal document. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, as if she didn't know how to respond. Jason didn't need her to respond. He didn't need her to say anything to make this right. The law had already spoken. "I'm giving you a chance here, Linda," Jason said, his voice calm. "Again, you can walk away and pretend this never happened, or you can face the consequences." Linda's breath caught in her throat. She knew exactly what the consequences would be. The law wasn't something you could ignore without paying the price. Jason had given her the opportunity to back down, to save face, but he wasn't about to let her walk away unscathed. He had his reputation, his family's legacy, and the law on his side, and that was something Linda couldn't take away from him. Linda took a step back, her face flushing with embarrassment. She knew she had lost this battle. She hadn't just messed with Jason's car, she had messed with someone who knew exactly how to fight back. And now, there was no going back. "I'll take care of this," she said quietly, almost as if speaking to herself. "Good," Jason replied, his eyes never leaving hers. "And don't think for a second this is over. There's more where this came from." Jason watched Linda walk away, her shoulders slumped. He didn't need to follow her. He knew that victory was already his. He wasn't just a man who fought for his rights. He was a man who made sure the law worked for him. And for Linda Harper, that was a lesson she would never forget. Jason hadn't expected Linda to cave so easily. But as she walked away, he felt a sense of quiet satisfaction, like a calm after the storm. He knew she would never forget this moment, and the power he had wielded with such precision. The next few days passed quietly, But Jason couldn't shake the feeling that Linda wasn't done yet. He'd seen her at HOA meetings before, always acting like she was above the law, her demeanor smug and self-righteous. But now, she had been put in her place, and he couldn't help but wonder how long it would take for her to try something again. As he sat in his office one afternoon, the phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number, and for a split second, he debated not answering. But something in his gut told him to pick up. "Hello, this is Jason Miller," he said, his voice steady. On the other end, he heard a frantic voice. "Jason, it's Mrs. Chun. You won't believe this, but Linda's at it again." Jason's pulse quickened. Mrs. Chun was his neighbor, a sweet woman who had always looked out for his family. She was the one who had watched over his house while he was away, and Jason trusted her implicitly. "What's going on?" he asked, trying to remain calm. "She's sending out more violation notices," Mrs. Chun said, her voice tight with worry. "But this time, she's targeting the whole neighborhood, including you. She's claiming your property is in violation of the HOA rules again." Jason leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. He had known this was coming. Linda wasn't the type to back down, not after the public defeat he'd handed her. But he wasn't going to let her get away with this. "Thanks for letting me know, Mrs. Chun. I'll take care of it," he said before hanging up. He sat there for a moment, thinking. This wasn't just about stickers anymore. Linda had overstepped again, and this time, Jason was ready. The law was on his side, but he needed to make sure it worked in his favor. He stood up, walked to his file cabinet, and pulled out the court documents that had started all of this. He scanned them quickly, his eyes narrowing as he found the specific clause he was looking for. The court had ruled that any attempt to remove the stickers would result in legal action against the HOA. Jason had already filed the necessary paperwork to protect himself, but it seemed Linda had either forgotten or simply ignored it. He wasn't going to let her make the same mistake twice. Later that afternoon, Jason made a call to his attorney, a woman named Sarah Adams who had handled the original case. He briefed her on the new violation notices Linda was sending out, explaining that the HOA was once again overstepping their bounds. "We need to move quickly," Jason said. "I want to make sure this doesn't escalate any further." Sarah agreed, and within hours, they had drafted a cease and desist letter to be sent to the HOA. The letter was clear. If Linda or the HOA attempted to remove the stickers or issue further fines, they would face serious legal consequences. Jason knew that this time, there would be no escaping the fallout. But he also knew that he needed to make sure Linda understood exactly what she was up against. The following day, he delivered the letter in person. He drove to the HOA office, his car moving smoothly through the streets of Willowbrook Estates. As he parked outside the building, he saw Linda standing near the entrance, talking to a few neighbors. When she spotted him, her face darkened, but Jason didn't flinch. He walked up to her, holding the letter out in front of him. "This is for you," he said calmly. "It's a formal cease and desist order. You've crossed the line again, Linda, and if you don't stop, there will be consequences." Linda's eyes flickered with panic before she quickly masked it with a sneer. "You can't scare me, Jason," she said, but there was an edge to her voice. Jason took a step closer, not threatening, just calm and measured. "I'm not trying to scare you," he replied. "I'm just making sure you understand the law." He turned and walked away, leaving Linda standing there, holding the letter in her hand. He knew that would be the last time she tried to pull anything like this again. That night, Jason sat down with a glass of whiskey, reflecting on everything that had transpired. It had started with a simple dispute over stickers, but it had grown into something much bigger. He wasn't just fighting for his property anymore. He was fighting for respect. Respect for the law, for his rights, and for the integrity of his neighborhood. The next day, Jason received an email from Sarah. The HOA had responded. This time, they were backing down. They had realized the severity of their actions and agreed to stop sending violation notices. Linda had been forced to concede, and the matter was finally settled. Jason smiled as he read the email. It wasn't about winning a battle. It was about making sure people like Linda understood that they couldn't just trample over others. He had fought for what was right, and in the end, the law had prevailed. As he closed his laptop, he glanced out the window at the peaceful neighborhood. Willowbrook Estates was quiet once more, and Jason Miller had made sure it stayed that way. Jason thought he could finally put the whole situation behind him, with the cease and desist letter delivered, and the HOA backing off. He expected things to settle down. But it was only a matter of time before the peace he fought so hard for would be tested again. It all started one Saturday morning. Jason had been enjoying a quiet cup of coffee on his front porch, watching the sunrise over Willowbrook Estates. The neighborhood was calm, as it always had been in the mornings. Birds chirped, and the soft hum of distant lawnmowers filled the air. It was one of those rare moments when life felt like it was finally back to normal. But that calm didn't last. As Jason sat there, enjoying his coffee, he noticed something out of the corner of his eye. A black SUV slowly cruised down the street, its tinted windows reflecting the sunlight. Jason didn't think much of it at first. There were always cars driving through the neighborhood, especially on weekends. But then, the SUV stopped right in front of his house. Jason sat up straighter, a sense of unease creeping into his chest. He knew who this was. Linda Harper. He could feel it. The car idled for a moment before the driver's side door opened. Jason stood up from his porch chair, watching as the woman he had fought so hard against stepped out of the vehicle, wearing a forced smile on her face. "Morning, Jason," Linda called out, her voice dripping with that sweet but insincere tone she always used. Jason didn't respond right away. He just stood there, crossing his arms and watching her as she walked toward him. The sun made her blonde hair shine, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. She stopped at the edge of the porch, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "I just wanted to stop by and make sure everything's good," she said. "You know, after everything that's happened, I thought it would be nice to check in." Jason's brow furrowed. He knew better than to fall for her polite gestures. She had a history of pretending to be friendly when, in reality, she was still holding a grudge. "What do you want, Linda?" he asked, his voice steady but firm. Linda's smile faltered for a moment before she regained her composure. "I just wanted to clear the air, Jason. No hard feelings, right? I mean, we've both been through a lot, and I think it's time we move on from all this." Jason didn't buy it. He knew Linda wasn't the type to back down that easily. There was always something more with her. He took a step forward, closer to the edge of the porch, his eyes locked onto hers. "You didn't come here just to talk, Linda," he said. "What's really going on?" Linda hesitated, her lips pressing into a thin line. For a moment, Jason thought she might actually tell him the truth. But then, she dropped the smile and got to the point. "I'm here to tell you that the HOA has decided to reevaluate your property once again," she said. "There have been some complaints about the condition of your yard, and the HOA board feels that it's time to address those concerns." Jason felt a flash of anger rise in his chest, but he kept it under control. He had been through this before, and he wasn't going to let Linda get to him again. "My yard is perfectly fine," he replied calmly. "And last time I checked, the HOA doesn't get to just show up whenever they feel like it. You're not welcome here." Linda's expression hardened. She stepped forward, ignoring Jason's stance. "This isn't about you anymore, Jason," she said, her voice suddenly cold. "This is about the community. And whether you like it or not, we have the right to ensure everyone follows the rules." Jason felt his heart rate pick up, but he kept his voice even. "You're not in charge here, Linda. You never were," he said. "And if you think you can just walk into my life and mess with me again, you're sadly mistaken." Linda narrowed her eyes, her smile returning, but this time, it was more menacing than before. "I'm just doing my job," she said, as though it was that simple. "And you should be grateful I'm giving you a chance to fix things before it gets worse." Jason clenched his fists, the frustration bubbling inside him. He had been patient for too long. He had tried to follow the rules, but Linda kept pushing, kept testing him. And now he was done. "I've had enough of your threats," Jason said, his voice low and steady. "You're not going to run this neighborhood. Not anymore." Linda's eyes flashed with anger, but she quickly masked it with a smug smile. "We'll see about that," she said before turning on her heel and walking back to her SUV. Jason watched as she drove off, the tires crunching over the gravel. He stood there for a moment, letting the adrenaline settle in his veins. He knew this wasn't over. But this time, he wouldn't let Linda win. He had the law on his side, and he wasn't about to let her tear apart the community he loved. The battle was far from over, and Jason Miller wasn't about to back down. He had fought too hard, and now it was time to turn the tables once and for all. Jason sat at his kitchen table, staring at the stack of documents in front of him. The cease and desist letter had done its job, for now, But the latest confrontation with Linda had left a bitter taste in his mouth. He knew this wasn't over. He had expected her to back down, to take the hint and move on. But Linda was like a dog with a bone. She couldn't just let it go. Jason wasn't about to let her get the better of him again, not after everything he had already been through. He'd fought for his rights before, and he'd do it again if necessary. The question was, how far would Linda go this time? And what would it take to finally put an end to her overreach? As Jason ran his hand over the papers, a thought crossed his mind. He wasn't going to sit around and wait for her to make the next move. He would take action. He knew that Linda's power was rooted in the HOA, but the truth was, she didn't have the authority she thought she did. She could play her little games all she wanted, but the moment she stepped into territory that was legally protected, she would have to answer for it. That was exactly what he had been preparing for. Jason reached for his phone and dialed Sarah Adams, his lawyer. Sarah had been with him through the initial battle with the HOA, and he trusted her completely. "Sarah, it's Jason," he said when she picked up. "I need your help again." Sarah's voice was warm but professional. "What's going on?" she asked. Jason explained everything. The latest violation notices, Linda's visit, and how it was all starting up again. "I'm not going to let her push me around," Jason said, his voice steady. "I need you to help me put an end to this once and for all." Sarah paused for a moment, processing the information. "All right, Jason. We can't let this go unchecked. Let me pull up the necessary documents, and I'll get started on the next step." Jason knew she was already planning her strategy. Sarah had a way of turning even the most complicated situations into something simple and actionable. He trusted her to get it done. The next few days were a blur of phone calls, emails, and paperwork. Sarah worked quickly, and soon Jason had a plan in place. This time, they weren't just going to push back against Linda's attempts to control his property. They were going to take the fight to the HOA itself. Jason knew that Linda wasn't the only one at fault here. The entire HOA had been complicit in her actions, turning a blind eye to her abuses of power. If Jason wanted to end this once and for all, he had to hold them all accountable. He wasn't just fighting for his own rights anymore. He was fighting for everyone in the neighborhood who had been intimidated or threatened by the HOA. With Sarah's help, they drafted a new legal action that would force the HOA to answer for its actions. It was a bold move, but Jason was done playing defense. He was ready to take the offensive. As he sent off the final documents, Jason couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation. This time, it wouldn't just be about winning the small battles. This was about taking back control of the entire neighborhood. And Jason wasn't afraid to do whatever it took. A few days later, Jason received an unexpected call. It was Sarah, but this time, her tone was different. "Jason," she said, her voice tight with urgency, "we've got a situation." Jason's stomach dropped. "What's going on?" he asked. "Linda's trying to escalate things," Sarah explained. "She's contacted the city council, claiming that your legal actions are interfering with HOA operations. She's pushing to have your property designated as a neighborhood nuisance. It's a serious accusation, and if she manages to get the city involved, it could complicate everything." Jason's mind raced. Linda had found another way to fight back, but he wasn't about to let her use the system to bully him. "What can we do?" he asked, already thinking ahead. "We take it to court," Sarah replied, her confidence never wavering. "We'll prove that everything Linda is doing is illegal, and we'll make sure she understands that her actions have consequences." Jason was silent for a moment, weighing the situation. He knew this fight wasn't going to be easy, but he had come this far. There was no turning back now. "Let's do it," he said, his voice determined. "We'll take her to court, and this time we finish it." Over the next few weeks, Jason and Sarah worked tirelessly to prepare their case. They gathered evidence, interviewed witnesses, and made sure every detail was covered. The stakes were high, but Jason knew they were doing the right thing. He wasn't just defending his home. He was defending his community, the place where he and his family had built their lives. The day of the hearing arrived, and Jason stood in the courtroom, his heart pounding in his chest. He had been in plenty of legal battles before, but this one felt different. This time, it wasn't just about him. It was about the entire neighborhood. Linda sat on the other side of the courtroom, her smug expression from the other day replaced with a look of anxiety. Jason could see she was starting to realize just how serious things had become. But it was too late for her now. The evidence was on Jason's side, and he wasn't going to back down. As the judge called the case, Jason stood tall, ready to take on whatever Linda or the HOA threw at him. This wasn't just about stickers anymore. This was about making sure that no one ever tried to bully him or anyone else in the neighborhood again. The battle was just beginning, and Jason Miller was ready to win. The courtroom was tense as Jason sat in the defendant's chair, his back straight and his mind focused. He had been in plenty of legal battles before, but this one felt different. This wasn't just a case about property rights or neighborhood disputes. It was a fight for respect, for fairness, and for the community he had built his life in. Across from him, Linda sat with her lawyer, trying to maintain an air of confidence, but Jason could see the cracks. She wasn't as calm as she appeared. Jason could feel the weight of the moment, the pressure building in his chest as the judge called the court to order. The room fell silent, and all eyes turned to the bench as the proceedings began. Jason's heart beat steadily, each thud a reminder of how much was at stake. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about everyone who had ever felt intimidated or pushed around by Linda and the HOA. This was for all the neighbors who had been too scared to speak up. The judge, an older man with a stern expression, looked over his glasses at the lawyers. "Are both sides ready?" he asked. Jason's lawyer, Sarah, nodded confidently. "Yes, Your Honor," she replied. "We are ready." Linda's lawyer, a man who had been quietly whispering to her throughout the morning, also nodded. "We're ready, Your Honor," he said. The judge gave a single nod, signaling for the proceedings to begin. Sarah stood first, walking toward the front of the courtroom with her notes in hand. Jason knew she was ready. She had prepared for this moment for weeks. "Your Honor," Sarah began, her voice clear and authoritative. "We are here today because of the actions of the HOA, specifically Ms. Linda Harper, who has continuously harassed my client, Mr. Jason Miller, with unwarranted fines, baseless violation notices, and now, an attempt to force him into compliance with arbitrary rules." She paused, letting her words sink in. "We have presented evidence that Mr. Miller's property was unfairly targeted, despite his adherence to all HOA guidelines, and despite the fact that the HOA's actions were clearly outside the bounds of the law." Sarah turned to the judge, holding up a thick stack of papers. "These documents, Your Honor, are proof of the HOA's repeated overreach, and we request that the court take action to prevent any further harassment, as well as impose sanctions on the HOA for their conduct." Jason watched as the judge studied the documents carefully. He could feel the weight of the argument building. Sarah had made her case, and Jason felt a surge of hope. This was it. This was the moment when everything could change. Linda's lawyer stood next, and Jason couldn't help but notice how tense Linda looked. She had been so sure of herself before, but now, as her lawyer began to speak, she seemed to shrink in her chair. "Your Honor," the lawyer began, his voice smooth but lacking conviction. "This entire case is based on a misunderstanding. Ms. Harper and the HOA have always acted in the best interest of the neighborhood. The so-called violations are merely a matter of enforcing community standards, which are clearly outlined in the HOA's governing documents." He paused, glancing at Linda, who gave him a quick nod of approval. "While we understand that Mr. Miller has some grievances, these actions are in line with the rules of Willowbrook Estates, and we request that the court dismiss this case in its entirety." The lawyer sat down, and Linda gave a smug smile, clearly believing that her side had made the stronger argument. Jason could see her confidence, but he also saw the cracks. She was on the defensive now, and it was clear that the judge wasn't buying the argument. The judge cleared his throat, turning to both lawyers. "I will take some time to review the evidence presented today," he said, his voice firm. "But let me make one thing clear. This court will not tolerate harassment or violations of property rights. If the evidence supports Mr. Miller's claims, there will be consequences for the HOA." Jason's heart skipped a beat. The judge's words were like a shot of adrenaline straight to his veins. He had been right all along. He had known the law was on his side, but hearing the judge say it so plainly made him feel like he had already won. As the judge called for a brief recess, Jason turned to Sarah. "Do you think we've got this?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Sarah smiled, her eyes sharp and focused. "You've got this, Jason," she said. "The evidence is in your favor, and the law is on your side." Linda's time is up. Jason couldn't help but feel a surge of relief. After everything, after all the battles and the stress, he could finally see the light at the end of the tunnel. Linda had pushed him too far, and now it was her turn to face the consequences. The recess ended, and everyone returned to their seats. The judge took a few moments to review the documents before looking up, his eyes settling on Linda. "I've reviewed the evidence, and I've heard both sides," he said. "It is clear that the HOA has overstepped its authority in this case. The actions taken against Mr. Miller were unwarranted and unlawful. The court orders that the violation notices be nullified, and the HOA will be required to pay restitution for any fines levied against Mr. Miller." Jason felt a wave of relief wash over him. The judge had ruled in his favor. Linda's face turned red with fury, but there was nothing she could do. The law had spoken, and this time, it wasn't in her favor. As Jason stood up to leave the courtroom, he felt the weight of the battle lift from his shoulders. He had fought for what was right, and he had won. Linda had tried to break him, but in the end, it was she who had been broken. Jason had finally taken back control of his life, his property, and his neighborhood. The days following the court decision felt like a strange mix of relief and disbelief. Jason couldn't quite shake the feeling that things had settled too quickly, too smoothly. Linda had lost, but he knew better than to assume that meant she was done. He'd been living with the tension for so long, expecting the worst at every turn, that the sudden calm felt almost unnatural. But as time passed, he began to notice the small signs of change in Willowbrook Estates. The neighborhood seemed quieter now, less tense. The cars that used to sit at the curb with HOA representatives taking notes were gone. The incessant violation notices that had been popping up on his door like clockwork had stopped. It was as if Linda's grip on the community had loosened, and Jason was finally able to breathe easy. That was until the phone rang. It was a late afternoon when the call came in. Jason had just finished a long day at work and was looking forward to an evening of peace. When he saw the number flash on his screen, he didn't recognize it, but something told him to pick up. "Hello," he answered. "Jason, it's Mrs. Chun," came the voice on the other end. Jason sat up straighter in his chair. Mrs. Chun had been one of his closest neighbors, and he'd trusted her completely. "What's going on, Mrs. Chun?" he asked, his voice tight with concern. "It's Linda," she said, her tone heavy with urgency. "She's back at it again, Jason. She's trying to organize a petition to have you removed from the neighborhood. She's telling everyone your trouble and that you've been causing unrest." Jason's stomach dropped. He had known it wasn't over, but hearing it directly from Mrs. Chun made the reality of it hit harder than he had expected. "What kind of petition?" Jason asked, his mind already racing. "She's telling people that you're not following the HOA rules, that your property is a nuisance again," Mrs. Chun explained. "She's got the neighborhood stirred up, and I'm worried it might get worse if we don't stop her." Jason exhaled slowly, trying to control the frustration rising inside him. "How many people has she gotten on her side?" he asked. "Not many yet," Mrs. Chun replied. "But she's making a lot of noise, and she's always good at convincing people to follow her. If she gets enough signatures, she might be able to cause trouble with the city again. I know you've been through a lot, but you need to stop her now before it goes too far." Jason rubbed his temples, the weight of it all sinking in. He had thought that after the court case, he would finally have some peace. But Linda wasn't just going to fade into the background. She wasn't done fighting, not by a long shot. "I'll handle it," Jason said, his voice firm. "Thanks for letting me know, Mrs. Chun. I won't let her get away with this." After he hung up, Jason leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. He had to act quickly. He wasn't about to let Linda rally the neighborhood against him again. He had already been through the legal battle, and he wasn't going to lose his home, his rights, or his dignity to her again. He knew it was time for another strategy. The next morning, Jason called Sarah. She had been his lawyer throughout the initial fight, and he trusted her judgment more than anyone. "Sarah, we need to talk," he said. When she answered, "Linda's at it again." He quickly explained the situation, Linda's latest attempt to discredit him and organize the neighborhood against him. "She's trying to make me out to be the bad guy again," he finished. Sarah was silent for a moment, but Jason could hear the gears turning in her mind. "I'm not surprised," she finally said. "Linda's not the type to back down after a loss. But we have options. We'll need to gather support from your neighbors, too. We can't let her control the narrative." Jason nodded, feeling a surge of resolve. "What do we need to do?" he asked. "We'll start by reaching out to the people who have been on your side all along," Sarah said. "We need to gather statements from your neighbors, people who know the truth about the situation. The more people we have on our side, the harder it will be for Linda to convince anyone that you're the problem. Jason knew Sarah was right. He needed to turn the tables, to show the community that Linda's narrative was based on lies, not facts. Over the next week, Jason worked tirelessly, reaching out to neighbors who had supported him in the past. He asked them to share their experiences, to give statements about how Linda had tried to push her agenda and bully others. He compiled everything he could, testimonies, emails, even photos of the false violation notices Linda had sent. He wasn't just defending himself anymore. He was fighting to protect the entire neighborhood from Linda's manipulative tactics. With Sarah's help, Jason drafted a letter to present at the next HOA meeting. It wasn't just a letter defending his own rights. It was a letter that exposed Linda's behavior and warned the community about what she was capable of. This ends now, Jason muttered to himself as he sealed the envelope. He wasn't going to let Linda tear apart the place he called home. The day of the HOA meeting, Jason arrived early, armed with the letter and all the evidence he had gathered. He was ready to confront Linda head-on, to finally put an end to her reign of manipulation. As the meeting began, Jason stood up, his heart pounding in his chest, and walked to the front of the room. "I'm not here to fight with anyone," he said, his voice calm but firm. "I'm here to make sure we're all treated fairly, that no one gets bullied into silence. I'm here to stand up for the truth." He paused, letting his words sink in. "And I'm here to show you that the real problem in this neighborhood is the person trying to control it. Linda Harper is using the HOA to manipulate, intimidate, and deceive. And I won't stand for it anymore." Jason could see the surprise on Linda's face, the shock that someone was finally standing up to her. But it wasn't just her who was surprised, it was the entire room. Jason had taken control of the narrative. He had turned the tables, and now it was time for Linda to face the consequences of her actions. Jason wasn't just fighting for his rights anymore. He was fighting for the future of Willowbrook Estates. And he wasn't going to lose. The room was silent as Jason stood at the front of the HOA meeting, his eyes scanning the faces of his neighbors. For the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of control. Linda was sitting at the table, her face flushed with embarrassment, and Jason could see the anger brewing behind her eyes. She wasn't used to being challenged, and now, her own neighbors were beginning to see her for what she truly was. Jason knew this was the turning point. It was time to put an end to Linda's reign of terror, once and for all. "I'm not here to fight," Jason began, his voice steady and firm. "I'm here because I believe in fairness. I believe in what's right. And what's happening here is not right." He paused for a moment, allowing the room to absorb his words. "Linda Harper has been using this HOA as a weapon. She's manipulated the rules, used her position to intimidate and control people, and when she couldn't get her way, she resorted to underhanded tactics. But I'm done letting her get away with it." Jason glanced at Linda, who had her arms crossed tightly in front of her, her gaze cold and defiant. He wasn't afraid of her anymore. "I've spent months collecting evidence, talking to neighbors, and listening to your stories," he continued. "And I've come to realize something important. This isn't just about me. This is about all of us. The people in this neighborhood who have been scared to speak up, who've been bullied into silence because they didn't want to rock the boat. Well, I'm here to tell you that it's time to stop being afraid." Linda shifted uncomfortably in her seat, but Jason didn't take his eyes off her. He was ready. He had all the facts on his side, and he was determined to make sure the truth came to light. "I've seen how Linda has treated all of you," Jason said, his voice gaining strength. "She's fined people for the most ridiculous things: an untrimmed hedge, a flower pot in the wrong place, a mailbox that was just slightly off-center. And when people couldn't pay those fines, she would threaten them with legal action, with foreclosure. That's not the role of the HOA. The HOA is here to protect the community, not to tear it apart." Jason's words hung in the air, and he could see the wheels turning in the minds of the neighbors in the room. He could tell they were starting to realize just how much they had put up with. And that realization was starting to turn the tide. Jason wasn't just speaking for himself anymore. He was speaking for all of them. "I'm asking you all to stand with me," Jason said, his voice steady but impassioned. "We can't let Linda or anyone else in the HOA continue to bully and manipulate us. We have to hold them accountable. We need to protect this community, to make sure that no one is ever subjected to this kind of treatment again." There was a pause in the room. Jason could feel the weight of it, the uncertainty, the hesitation. But then, one by one, neighbors began to speak up. Mrs. Chun, the woman who had warned him about Linda's petition, was the first to stand. "Jason's right," she said, her voice shaking but determined. "I've lived here for over 30 years, and I've never seen anything like this. Linda has been making our lives miserable for far too long. It's time for it to end." Another neighbor, Mr. Harris, stood next. "I've been fined for my lawn not being perfectly mowed," he said, shaking his head. "It's ridiculous. I've had enough of this." One by one, the neighbors joined in, expressing their frustration with the HOA and their support for Jason. Linda was silent now, her face pale as she realized the tide was turning. Jason could see her eyes darting around the room, trying to gauge who was still on her side. But it was clear that the community had seen through her. "This isn't just about a few rules," Jason said, his voice growing stronger with each passing moment. "This is about power. It's about who gets to control this neighborhood. And I'm here to tell you that it's not going to be Linda Harper. It's going to be all of us, together." The room erupted into applause, and Jason felt a sense of relief flood over him. It wasn't just his fight anymore, it was theirs too. And together, they were going to make sure Linda couldn't hurt anyone else. The HOA board tried to call for order, but it was clear they were losing control. The people in the room had made their decision. Linda Harper's time in power was over. Jason turned to Sarah, who was sitting in the back of the room, nodding approvingly. She had been right all along. This was the moment they had been working toward. It wasn't just about winning the case. It was about standing up to the people who thought they could bully others with impunity. And now, Jason had done just that. As the meeting adjourned, Jason stood tall, knowing that the battle was finally over. He had won, not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever felt like they were powerless against the HOA. Linda may have thought she could break him, but she had underestimated the strength of a community standing together. Jason walked out of that room a free man, knowing that he had taken back control of Willowbrook Estates, and he wasn't about to let anyone take it away from him again. The days following the HOA meeting felt surreal to Jason. The victory was not just his, but the neighborhood's. He had never expected the fight to go this far, but he was grateful it had. What started as a personal battle had turned into a collective effort that would change Willowbrook Estates for good. But even in the midst of his triumph, Jason remained cautious. He knew Linda was not the type to just accept defeat and fade into the background. He had seen her arrogance, her need for control, and he suspected this wouldn't be the last time she tried to stir up trouble. However, for now, the community was at peace. The victory felt sweet. The next weekend, Jason took a stroll through the neighborhood, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth as he walked past his neighbors' homes. People waved to him as they went about their business, and there was a newfound sense of camaraderie that hadn't been there before. It felt like the weight of constant surveillance, violation notices, and intimidation had been lifted. It was a community again. Jason smiled as he passed by Mrs. Chen's house. She was sitting on her porch, knitting, as usual. When she saw him, she waved her hand energetically. "Hey there, Jason. You did it, didn't you?" she called out with a wide smile. Jason gave her a nod and waved back. "We did it," he replied, his heart swelling with pride. The victory hadn't just been his. It had been a community effort. As he continued walking, Jason noticed something that hadn't caught his attention before, a small park at the edge of the neighborhood that had once felt neglected. It was the kind of place that people only passed by on their way to somewhere else. But now, the park was alive. There were children playing on the swings, a few elderly neighbors sitting on benches chatting, and families enjoying the afternoon sun. The transformation wasn't just in the neighborhood's atmosphere. It was in the way people saw each other now. They saw themselves as a community, not a collection of individuals too afraid to speak out. Jason stood there for a moment, watching the scene unfold before him. The quiet satisfaction of knowing that he had been a part of something bigger than himself washed over him. The victory was not just a legal one. It was a personal one too. He had stood up for what was right, and in doing so, he had reminded the people of Willowbrook Estates that they had a voice. Jason didn't have to wait long for his next surprise. That evening, as he sat down for dinner with his kids, there was a knock at the door. He opened it to find Mr. Harris, one of the neighbors who had supported him during the HOA meeting. Mr. Harris was holding an envelope. "Jason," he said, his voice full of enthusiasm, "I just wanted to say thank you. You've given us all back something we didn't realize we'd lost, our community spirit. Jason smiled. I didn't do it alone, he replied, taking the envelope. Mr. Harris nodded, his face sincere. We all know that. But you were the spark, the catalyst. And because of you, things are finally changing around here. Jason looked at the envelope, then back at Mr. Harris. What's this? He asked, curious. It's a little something from all of us, Mr. Harris said. We wanted to show our appreciation. A little gesture to let you know we're behind you. Jason opened the envelope, and inside, he found a check. It wasn't a huge amount, but it was enough to make him pause. A thank you from the neighbors, a sign that they were truly behind him, that they respected him for standing up for them. It was more than just money. It was a symbol of what he had helped build. You don't have to do this, Jason said, feeling slightly overwhelmed. I didn't do it for this. Mr. Harris smiled. We know, but that's why we're doing it. You gave us back our voice. Now we want to give something back to you. Jason shook his head with a grin, putting the check back into the envelope. Thank you, he said sincerely. But the real gift is what we've accomplished together. As the days turned into weeks, Jason began to see more changes in the neighborhood. The HOA meetings were quieter now. The residents no longer feared Linda's threats or the arbitrary fines that had once seemed so random. The HOA had been forced to become more transparent, more accountable. And Linda, well, Jason couldn't be sure what would happen to her, but he knew she wouldn't be able to wield the same power she once had. The people of Willowbrook Estates had taken their community back. Jason's relationship with his kids had also improved. They had witnessed everything. The fights, the long nights of stress, the uncertainty. But now, they could see the results. They saw their dad standing strong, not just for them, but for the neighborhood as well. I'm proud of you, Dad, his daughter Emma said one afternoon, looking up at him with a smile. You really made a difference. Jason smiled back, his heart swelling with pride. We all did, he said. We all made a difference. And in that moment, as he looked around at the peaceful, quiet neighborhood he had fought so hard to protect, Jason realized that it wasn't just about winning a fight. It was about building something that would last. Something that would stand as a testament to the power of one person and how that person could change the course of an entire community.